A Navy SEAL was driving through a violent mountain storm when something on the roadside made him slow down. Beneath an old oak tree stood a pregnant German shepherd, chained, trembling, a sign above her reading, "Dog killer. Leave it." Why would someone abandon a trained working dog in the middle of nowhere? What did she know, or what had she survived? And who would come looking when she disappeared? What happened next would uncover a hidden system no one wanted exposed. But in the middle of that storm, one quiet choice might just restore your faith in courage. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. And if this story touches your soul, please help me reach my first 1,000 subscribers. It would mean the world to me. May God protect you and your loved ones. Rain tore across the Blue Ridge Mountains, turning the narrow mountain road into a ribbon of blurred gray beneath a sky split by lightning. Lieutenant Caleb Mercer drove steadily through the storm, shoulders squared beneath a dark field jacket, posture upright with the quiet discipline of a man who had spent most of his adult life under orders. At 36, he carried the lean, hardened build of an active-duty Navy SEAL, strength without excess, movement without waste. His dark brown hair was clipped short in a regulation fade, rain-damp air curling faintly at the edges, and a faint shadow of stubble traced a jaw sharpened more by experience than vanity. His gray-blue eyes scanned the road with habitual vigilance, reading terrain and shadow, even when there was no tactical reason to do so. He had returned from deployment only days ago, officially on brief leave before reporting back. Unofficially, he was trying to relearn stillness. Yet the mountains did not feel still tonight. Thunder rolled across the ridges in low, concussive waves, and somewhere deep in his chest, an old reflex stirred before he could quiet it. The windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm, struggling against sheets of rain that distorted the trees into bending silhouettes. Caleb adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, grounding himself in the present through small, deliberate motions. He had walked through places where every sound carried consequence, where hesitation cost more than pride. Here, there was only weather, cold, relentless, indifferent. He told himself this was what normal felt like, just a road, just a storm. No mission objective, no extraction point, no voice in his ear counting down seconds. Yet the absence of command felt strangely louder than orders ever had. His mind drifted toward memories he kept carefully compartmentalized. Dust rising under boots, the scent of burning metal, the steady breath of a K-9 partner waiting for instruction. He pushed the images aside. This was not that world. Tonight was meant to be nothing more than a drive through mountains that did not care who he was. He almost passed the shape at the roadside. It registered first as a darker shadow at the base of one of the massive oaks lining the shoulder. Instinct reacted before thought. His foot eased off the accelerator, the truck slowing gradually as tires whispered over wet gravel. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating the world in stark white clarity for a heartbeat. In that flash, the shadow resolved into something unmistakable. A German shepherd stood at the base of a lightning-scarred tree whose bark was split and twisted from years of storms. A heavy chain wrapped around the trunk and around the dog's body, pulling taut with every strained movement. Rain plastered her black and tan coat to her ribs, revealing how thin she had grown. Even from inside the cab, Caleb could see the tremor in her legs as she fought to remain upright. Then he noticed her abdomen. Rounded. Heavy. Shifting faintly beneath soaked fur. She was pregnant. The realization settled heavily, displacing every other thought. Caleb brought the truck to a full stop and cut the engine, and the sudden silence made the storm feel intimate, almost oppressive. He remained seated for a long moment, hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, analyzing options the way he had been trained to do. A chained animal could be unpredictable, especially cornered and exhausted. He could report it. Let local authorities handle it. Continue driving and keep his name separate from whatever had happened here. It was the logical choice. It required no emotional investment. But logic did not quiet the image in front of him. The dog shifted her weight, the chain scraping harshly against bark. Her legs wobbled, but did not collapse. She lifted her head, ears pinned halfway back, amber eyes searching through the rain. There was no mindless aggression in her expression, only vigilance and strain. As Caleb stepped out of the truck, cold rain immediately soaking through his jacket, she reacted with a low, hoarse growl pulled from deep in her chest. She angled her body instinctively, placing herself between him and the curve of her belly, protecting what she carried. Even chained, even trembling. Caleb stopped several yards away, boots sinking slightly into mud, hands rising slowly with palms visible. He had worked alongside military working dogs before. He understood boundaries, understood the fine line between reassurance and threat. "Easy," he said, his voice low and steady despite the wind. He approached at an angle rather than directly, movements deliberate and controlled, careful not to lock his gaze into a challenge. The chain had been wrapped methodically, tightened in a way that ensured she could not reach the road. It was not careless abandonment. It was calculated. Above her, nailed into the scarred oak, hung a warped wooden board. Black paint bled downward beneath the rain, the letters crude but readable. Dog killer. Leave it. Caleb felt something tighten in his jaw as he read the words. He had seen labels used as weapons before, seen how quickly judgment replaced truth when fear demanded a simple explanation. The shepherd pulled against the chain again as he stepped closer, metal snapping taut. Her legs slid briefly in the mud, but she fought to stay upright, refusing to collapse in front of him. He could still leave. No one would know he had slowed down. No report would carry his name. The storm would wash away his tire tracks within minutes, but the image of her, soaked, chained, shielding unborn life with what little strength she had left, lodged somewhere deeper than convenience. Caleb took another step forward, stopping just beyond the reach of the chain. Rain streamed down his face and into his collar, but he did not look away. "We're not leaving you here," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. It was not bravado. It was not sentiment. It was a decision. Standing between thunder and a life the world had already written off, Caleb Mercer chose not to drive away. Rain pressed down harder against the mountain road, flattening the world into motion and shadow as thunder rolled low across the ridgeline. Caleb stood several yards from the chained German shepherd, rain soaking through his jacket until the cold settled deep into his shoulders. But he did not retreat. He kept his posture relaxed, knees slightly bent, body angled rather than squared toward her, the way he had been trained to approach volatility without escalating it. Up close, the details were sharper. She was larger than he had first realized, likely around 4 years old, built with the muscular structure of a working-line shepherd rather than a backyard pet. Her coat, black saddle over deep tan, was dulled by mud and exhaustion, but the thickness of it spoke of strength. Her amber eyes tracked every movement he made, wary yet intelligent. When she growled, it was low and controlled, not frantic. Even chained, even weakened, she carried herself like something that had once known structure and purpose. He crouched slowly, careful not to close the distance too quickly. The chain wrapped around the oak trunk was industrial grade, heavy steel with a locking clasp more commonly used for equipment than animals. It had been looped deliberately around her midsection and neck, tight enough to restrict her range without cutting off airflow. That detail unsettled him more than brute cruelty would have. Whoever had done this had known exactly how much restraint was enough. Above her head, nailed into the bark, the wooden board sagged beneath the rain. Dog killer. Leave it. The black paint ran in streaks, but the message remained unmistakable. Caleb studied the lettering. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't panicked. It was written with conviction. That chilled him in a way the storm did not. The dog shifted again, pulling slightly against the chain as if testing its limits. Her body instinctively angled to shield her belly, and Caleb noticed faint scarring along her flank. Old marks, healed cleanly, the kind left by training collars or rough handling. He had worked with military K-9 units long enough to recognize disciplined conditioning when he saw it. This was not a feral animal that had wandered too close to livestock. Her posture, even under strain, carried awareness. Her growl held warning, not madness. He spoke softly, keeping his tone level. "You're not what that sign says, are you?" The question was rhetorical, but saying it aloud steadied something inside him. Labels were convenient weapons. He had seen villages branded hostile because of a single rumor. He had seen good men reduced to headlines by narratives that ignored context. For a moment, his mind ran through scenarios. If she had attacked livestock, why chain her here in a storm instead of reporting her? Why leave her pregnant and exposed? The logic unraveled quickly. This was not justice. This was disposal. The word settled heavily in his thoughts. The shepherd's breathing grew faster as he shifted closer by a careful inch. She snapped once, not to bite, but to warn. Her teeth flashed white against the dark rain, then she pulled back, conserving strength. Caleb did not flinch. He had faced armed men in tighter spaces. But there was something more complicated here than threat assessment. This was a creature defending unborn life from a world that had already judged her. He felt an unexpected flicker of respect. The storm intensified, wind whipping rain sideways across the road. Caleb glanced briefly down the slope of the mountain, half expecting headlights or movement, but the road remained empty. The isolation struck him. Whoever had chained her had chosen this place intentionally, far enough from town to avoid scrutiny, close enough to the road for the message to be seen. A warning disguised as justification. He looked back at the sign. Dog killer. Leave it. He imagined someone standing here earlier, hammer in hand, believing they were right. That certainty disturbed him more than cruelty would have. Certainty left no room for reconsideration, and reconsideration was the difference between discipline and vengeance. He shifted his weight and studied her belly more closely. The movement beneath her ribs was subtle, but undeniable. The pups were alive. The idea tightened his jaw. He had seen destruction enough to know how fragile beginnings could be. The shepherd's muscles trembled again, but she refused to sit. Pride, perhaps, or instinct. Her ears flicked at every thunderclap, yet she did not collapse. Caleb recognized that resilience. It mirrored something he understood intimately, the refusal to fall while someone else depended on you. He exhaled slowly, steadying his pulse. If he attempted to cut the chain too quickly, she could panic and injure herself. If he delayed too long, exhaustion would take over. The balance required patience, not force. He reached slowly toward the clasp, stopping inches short when she growled again. He let his hand hover, allowing her to see it without feeling trapped. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, voice firm but calm. Rain dripped from his fingertips as he withdrew slightly, giving her space. He adjusted his approach, lowering himself further so he appeared less imposing. Her eyes never left him. In them he saw fear, yes, but also calculation. She was deciding, measuring him. Caleb felt the weight of that silent evaluation more intensely than any formal inspection. He had built a career on earning trust under fire. Now he needed to earn it from a chained animal in the rain. Lightning flared again, illuminating the scarred oak and the sagging sign above them. Caleb rose just enough to reach the board and tore it free from the bark, the nails giving way with a sharp crack. The shepherd startled, but did not lunge. He tossed the board aside into the mud, where the words disappeared beneath water and dirt. It was a small gesture, symbolic more than strategic, but it mattered to him. He would not let that sentence stand unchallenged. Then he returned his attention to the chain, stepping back into position, shoulders squared not in aggression, but in resolve. He knew now that this was not a misunderstanding. This was abandonment dressed as judgment. He drew a slow breath, rain and cold biting into his skin, and met her gaze again. "No more sentences without a hearing," he murmured. His hand moved once more toward the clasp, steady and deliberate. Whatever story had brought her here was incomplete, and he had no intention of letting it end at a roadside tree in a storm. He leaned in, careful and composed, prepared to begin undoing what someone else had decided too quickly. The storm did not weaken. It simply settled into a relentless rhythm, rain threading through the trees and pooling around the base of the lightning-scarred oak. Caleb remained several feet from the shepherd, forcing himself to slow down despite the urgency pressing against his instincts. Every part of his training told him to secure the situation quickly, remove the threat, control the environment. But this was not a combat zone, and she was not the enemy. She was exhausted, pregnant, and chained. He lowered himself gradually, knees bending until he was closer to her eye level, careful to keep his shoulders angled rather than squared. His breathing was deliberate, steady enough that she could sense calm instead of tension. Up close, he could see how rain traced the ridge of her skull and slid along her muzzle, dripping from whiskers that trembled with each exhale. Her amber eyes never left him. They were sharp, intelligent, calculating, but layered with fear that had settled too deep to disappear in a single moment. He extended one hand slowly, palm downward, stopping well short of her reach. She reacted immediately, chain snapping tight as she lunged half a step forward, a raw growl tearing from her throat. The sound was not full strength. It carried strain and warning more than aggression. Caleb did not flinch. He held position, allowing the chain to do its work without escalating the tension. He recognized the pattern. She was testing him, measuring how he responded to resistance. Military working dogs did the same with new handlers. They read hesitation, dominance, uncertainty. If he rushed, she would panic. If he retreated too quickly, she would confirm he was weak. So he remained still, eyes soft, jaw unclenched. "It's all right," he murmured, not expecting understanding in words, only tone. The chain had been secured with a heavy clasp partially hidden beneath mud and fur. Caleb shifted slightly to gain a better angle, careful not to step into her defensive perimeter. Rain soaked through his gloves as he reached toward the metal, then paused when she growled again. Her body angled protectively around her belly, ribs expanding sharply with each breath. He noticed faint swelling along her hind legs, the strain of carrying life combined with exposure and cold. She should have been resting somewhere dry, preparing for birth in safety. Instead, she stood chained in mud. Caleb felt a flare of anger, not loud or explosive, but controlled and deliberate. Anger, when sharpened properly, became resolve. He steadied himself, reminding his body that force would solve nothing here. He withdrew his hand slightly and shifted tactics. Rather than reaching directly for the clasp, he moved slower, tracing a gradual arc that brought him closer without sudden intent. His voice remained low, a continuous thread of sound that filled the silence between thunderclaps. He spoke not to command, but to normalize his presence. He told her what he was doing, even if she could not parse the words. He described the rain, the tree, the chain. The cadence of his speech steadied his own pulse. She watched, ears twitching with each subtle movement. When lightning flashed again, illuminating both of them in white, he saw something change in her eyes. Not trust yet, but hesitation layered over fear. That hesitation was an opening. He reached again, this time allowing his fingers to brush the chain lightly before moving to the clasp. She jerked forward, teeth snapping inches from his glove, but she did not connect. The chain caught her mid-lunge, and she landed awkwardly before regaining balance. Caleb did not recoil. He remained crouched, unmoving, giving her the chance to see that he would not retaliate. In his world, aggression was met with decisive response. Here, aggression needed patience. He waited through her heavy breathing, waited until the growl softened into a strained rumble. Only then did he try again. His fingers found the cold steel latch, slick with rain, resistant from rust and tension. It took effort to pry it loose. The metal had been tightened deliberately, secured to endure struggle. Caleb worked it slowly, careful not to create sudden jerks that would alarm her further. His forearms tightened beneath wet fabric, muscles flexing as he applied steady pressure rather than forceful pulls. She watched every motion, body coiled but no longer lunging. Her trust had not formed. It was suspended between fear and exhaustion. When the latch finally gave with a muted metallic click, the chain slackened slightly around her torso. The change was subtle, but profound. She froze, as if unsure what the absence of pressure meant. Caleb did not move closer. He did not reach to touch her. He simply remained there, allowing the space to shift. The chain fell away from the oak trunk with a dull thud into the mud. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The shepherd did not bolt. She did not collapse. She stood trembling, free, but uncertain what freedom required. Her eyes darted from Caleb to the road and back again. Rain continued to fall, indifferent to the moment. Caleb rose slowly to a half-stand, increasing his height gradually so as not to startle her. He stepped backward instead of forward, creating distance rather than closing it. He wanted her to understand that release did not come with capture. She took one tentative step sideways, testing her range, then another. The chain dragged loosely beside her, no longer binding but still present. She did not approach him. She did not retreat into the forest. She remained where she was, breathing hard, evaluating. Caleb felt the weight of that pause settle into something deeper than victory. He had cut metal, but trust was something else entirely. It would not arrive in a flash of gratitude or submission. It would come, if at all, through consistency. He lowered his hands to his sides and allowed the silence between them to stretch. The storm roared around them, but within that small circle at the base of the tree, something fragile had shifted. He had not conquered her fear. He had simply refused to confirm it. He met her gaze one more time, rain dripping from his brow, and gave a small nod, almost to himself. "That's enough for now," he said quietly. He would not force closeness. He would not claim loyalty. He had removed the chain, and for this moment, that was all. Trust would not be demanded. It would be earned in increments, in choices that proved he would not become another hand that hurt her. And so, beneath the storm, Caleb Mercer stepped back and allowed her the first true decision she had been given in days. By the time the storm began to thin into a steady, bitter rain, the road below the ridge lay slick and deserted beneath a low ceiling of fog. 2 pickup trucks rolled slowly toward the lightning-scarred oak, where the chain had been wrapped only hours earlier. The first truck stopped abruptly, headlights cutting across the empty roadside. A broad-shouldered man stepped out, boots splashing into mud without hesitation. His name was Raymond Hale, though most people in the small town called him Ray. In his early 40s, Ray carried the thick, compact build of someone used to physical labor. His beard was trimmed close but uneven, streaked with premature gray, and his dark eyes held a constant edge of irritation as though the world rarely aligned with his expectations. He wore a heavy flannel jacket soaked at the shoulders, jaw clenched as he stared at the bare oak trunk. The chain was gone. The dog was gone. Only mud and rainwater remained where he had left her. The second truck's door opened more slowly. A taller man stepped out, lean rather than broad, movements measured instead of impulsive. His name was Victor Langley, late 30s, clean-shaven with sharp cheekbones and pale blue eyes that missed very little. Where Ray carried anger on his sleeve, Victor carried calculation. His dark hair was slicked back despite the rain, and he wore gloves he did not bother removing as he surveyed the ground. Victor had once worked security contracts overseas, the kind that blurred legal lines and left few official records. He had returned home with a quiet understanding that discipline was useful, but profit was better. While Ray stomped toward the tree, muttering under his breath, Victor crouched carefully, studying the mud like a puzzle rather than a mess. "She was right here," Ray snapped, kicking at the soaked earth as if it might reveal something under force. His voice carried frustration sharpened by wounded pride. "No way she snapped that chain herself." Victor did not respond immediately. He ran a gloved finger along a tire impression partially filled with rainwater. The tread was deep, recent, and distinct from their own trucks. He traced it for several feet before standing again, rain dripping from his collar. "Someone stopped," he said quietly, voice calm and level. "They cut it." His tone held no surprise, only assessment. Ray's anger flared hotter at that. "Who the hell would interfere?" Victor's eyes flicked to the road, then back to the tree. "Someone who doesn't like being told to leave it." Ray spat into the mud, shoulders tense beneath soaked flannel. He had insisted the sign would keep people away. Fear and accusation were usually enough. The message nailed above the oak had been simple, direct, designed to discourage sympathy. Victor had approved the tactic, knowing how easily rumor filled in blanks. A dog accused of killing livestock required no further explanation in these parts. But Victor also knew the risk had never been about public reaction. It had been about exposure. The shepherd had been trained, conditioned beyond what local farms could produce. She had come through channels that were not meant to surface in daylight. Her pregnancy complicated matters. Uncontrolled variables did. Victor stepped closer to the tree, studying the nail holes where the board had been torn away. That detail interested him most. Whoever had cut the chain had also removed the sign. Not just impulsive rescue, intentional rejection of the narrative. He felt a thin thread of unease slip beneath his composure. Ray's involvement had begun as convenience. Ray handled property, livestock, the visible operations. Victor handled acquisition and placement, dogs with certain traits, certain capabilities, sourced quietly and moved carefully. Most were sold into private security or discreet contracts. A few that failed expectations were handled differently. Disposal was practical. But interference suggested attention. Attention threatened profit. "You think they're local?" Ray asked, anger shifting toward anxiety. Victor shook his head slightly. "Doesn't matter yet." His gaze returned to the tire tracks. They led up the ridge road, cutting through wet gravel before vanishing around a curve. They drove up, not down. That meant whoever had taken the dog was headed deeper into the mountains. Ray ran a hand through his damp beard, agitation simmering. "It's just a dog," he muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Victor's eyes sharpened at that. "It's not just a dog," he corrected quietly. "It's evidence." The word hung between them heavier than the rain. Ray paced in a tight circle, boots leaving chaotic impressions over the cleaner tire marks. His temper had always been quicker than his foresight. Years earlier, a failed partnership in a legitimate kennel business had left him resentful and eager to prove himself right about everything. Victor had seen that bitterness and found it useful. But bitterness lacked restraint. "We can track them," Ray insisted. "Storm's easing." Victor considered the sky, gauging visibility, weighing urgency against exposure. He did not rush decisions. Impatience had nearly cost him everything once overseas when a partner underestimated surveillance. That lesson had carved caution into his instincts. "We track," he said finally. "Carefully. No noise. No calls." His eyes flicked once more to the road, calculating distance, timing, risk. As they climbed back into their trucks, Victor felt the first flicker of genuine concern. Whoever had intervened had not only freed the shepherd, but rejected the accusation nailed to the tree. That suggested discernment. Someone who looked beyond the sign, someone who might look deeper still. Rain softened the edges of the tire impressions, but not enough to erase them entirely. Victor started the engine and followed the faint path upward, headlights slicing through thinning mist. Ray followed close behind, impatience visible in the way his truck accelerated too quickly between curves. The mountain swallowed the sound of both engines as they disappeared into the trees, following the tracks toward an unknown driver who had chosen not to leave things alone. Night settled heavy over the mountain cabin, rain softening to a steady whisper against the wooden roof and pine needles. Caleb's cabin sat deep within the tree line, a modest structure of weathered timber and stone that had belonged to his grandfather decades before. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of wood smoke and old cedar. He left the door open long enough for the shepherd to decide whether to follow, then stepped aside without gesture or command. She entered cautiously, paws silent on worn plank flooring, muscles coiled beneath damp fur. Up close beneath the lantern light, Caleb could see more clearly the lines of her body. Strong shoulders now dulled by fatigue, ribs faintly visible beneath soaked coat, her abdomen swollen with life. She held herself with rigid dignity, even in exhaustion. When he closed the door behind them, the sound echoed softly, and she flinched before steadying again. Caleb did not approach. He simply moved to the hearth, knelt, and began building a fire. The crackle of flame gradually replaced the hiss of rain. Caleb worked methodically, movements steady and predictable, as if performing a routine drill. He removed his soaked jacket, revealing the dark thermal shirt stretched across a disciplined frame, honed by years of training. A thin scar cut diagonally across his forearm, pale against tanned skin, a remnant of an operation overseas that had gone wrong and reshaped his understanding of risk. He did not speak much. Instead, he let the rhythm of simple actions define the room, stacking logs, pouring water into a kettle, setting it near the heat. The shepherd remained near the wall, eyes fixed on him, every muscle ready to react. Caleb understood that silence here was not emptiness. It was negotiation. He was offering predictability, not dominance. He placed a shallow bowl of water several feet away from himself and stepped back deliberately. No direct eye contact. No reaching. The shepherd's ears twitched as she evaluated the space. Her breathing was still uneven from stress and strain, but she did not growl. Instead, she shifted weight slowly and lowered her head just enough to scent the air. Caleb busied himself with drying a towel near the fire, pretending not to watch. In truth, every nerve in his body remained alert, though he refused to let tension leak into his posture. He had learned long ago that animals, and people, read what you tried to hide. The kettle began to hum softly as heat built beneath it. Steam curled upward, adding warmth to the cold edges of the room. Minutes passed before she moved toward the bowl. Each step was deliberate, cautious. She paused halfway, amber eyes flicking to Caleb's profile. He kept his shoulders relaxed, gaze lowered toward the fire. When she finally lowered her muzzle to the water, drinking in shallow, guarded laps, something shifted inside him. It was not triumph. It was relief. The smallest sign of choice mattered more than obedience ever could. She was not submitting. She was deciding. Caleb exhaled quietly, tension easing from muscles he had not realized were tight. Outside, wind brushed against the cabin walls, but inside the space began to feel less like a shelter and more like neutral ground. He found himself studying her movements more closely now that the initial crisis had passed. The way she kept her flank, angled toward him, still protecting her belly. The subtle tremor in her hind legs when she stood too long. The faint scar beneath her fur near the shoulder, shaped almost like a healed puncture wound. She was young, but not inexperienced. Perhaps 4 years old, bred for endurance, not comfort. Caleb recognized the physical language of resilience masking fatigue. It stirred something familiar within him. He had returned from missions carrying burdens he rarely named. He had perfected the art of appearing steady while adjusting to invisible weight. Watching her, he wondered if trust required both sides to acknowledge vulnerability, even silently. He moved slowly to a small cabinet and retrieved a folded wool blanket, laying it near the fire, but not too close. Again, he stepped back. The shepherd watched, head slightly lowered, but ears forward now rather than pinned. The tension in her growl had softened into watchfulness. Caleb sank into a wooden chair opposite her, hands resting loosely on his knees. He did not attempt conversation. He did not offer commands. Instead, he let the cabin fill with ordinary sounds, wood shifting in flame, water settling back into stillness, rain fading further outside. The simplicity steadied him. He had forgotten how much peace could live in repetition rather than urgency. After a long while, she moved toward the blanket. Not fully trusting, not relaxed, but less rigid than before. She circled once before lowering herself slowly, careful with her abdomen. Caleb felt the faintest hint of gratitude, not directed at him, but at the space itself. He leaned back in his chair, allowing fatigue to creep into his limbs now that vigilance could soften. In the quiet, he realized the silence did not echo the way loneliness had in the past. This silence was shared. It carried presence. He watched as her breathing began to slow, her body easing inch by inch into rest, while still keeping one eye partially open. Caleb remained awake long after the fire settled into embers. He understood that tonight was not about saving her completely. It was about creating one safe hour, then another, and trusting that safety could accumulate. He did not reach out to touch her, even when the urge to reassure tugged at him. Trust built slowly, and he would not shortcut it. As he finally rose to add one more log to the fire, he noticed her eyes following him without fear, only awareness. That was enough for now. In the quiet cabin, beneath the fading storm, Caleb Mercer chose patience over control and allowed healing to begin without forcing it. This story contains fictionalized elements for entertainment and educational purposes. Morning arrived pale and heavy, mist clinging low between the pines as the last of the storm drifted east beyond the ridge. Caleb had barely slept. He sat at the wooden table near the cabin window, a mug of untouched coffee cooling in his hand while River rested near the hearth. In the soft daylight, her condition was clearer. The swelling around her hind legs was more pronounced, and faint lines of old scarring marked the inside of her neck where a collar had once tightened repeatedly in the same place. She was alert now, no longer trembling, but still hyper-aware of every sound. When tires crunched slowly along the gravel drive outside, her head lifted instantly, ears forward, muscles tightening without visible panic. Caleb rose calmly, not wanting her to read alarm in him. He had made a call earlier that morning to someone he trusted, someone who understood both working dogs and the kind of silence surrounding them. Sarah Whitman stepped out of her dark green SUV with steady composure. She was in her early 40s, Tall and lean with an athlete's posture, auburn hair pulled into a low, practical braid that rested against the collar of her weatherproof jacket. Her skin carried the faint freckling of someone who had spent years outdoors, and her hazel eyes were sharp but kind, the kind of eyes that noticed more than they said. She moved with quiet efficiency, retrieving a black medical kit from the back seat. Sarah had once worked as a veterinary consultant for military K-9 units, rotating through bases stateside and overseas. The experience had shaped her in ways she rarely spoke about, especially the part where some dogs were deemed assets only as long as they performed flawlessly. She approached the cabin without hurry, reading the surroundings instinctively. Inside, River stiffened when Sarah entered, but she did not growl. Caleb stood slightly to the side, giving both space and reassurance through stillness. Sarah lowered herself gradually, avoiding direct eye contact, allowing River to scent her presence. "She's not feral," Sarah said quietly after a moment, her voice calm and controlled. "She's processing." Her gaze traced the shepherd's posture, the muscle tone beneath fur, the way her eyes flicked between both humans. Sarah removed her gloves slowly, revealing long fingers steady from years of precise work. She did not reach immediately. Instead, she observed the faint indentation beneath River's coat where a harness might have rested, the disciplined way she shifted weight rather than stumbling. "This dog's had structured training," Sarah continued, tone measured, and not basic obedience. Caleb felt something tighten in his chest at the confirmation. He had sensed it, but hearing it spoken made it tangible. "Military?" he asked quietly. Sarah shook her head slightly. "Possibly adjacent, but not official channels." Her expression grew more serious as she examined the scars more closely. "There's been talk," she added, voice lowering further. "Working breeds disappearing from smaller facilities, not reported properly, rehomed on paper, missing in practice." She glanced toward Caleb, gauging his reaction. "Some get funneled into private security, some into less regulated training operations, and when they don't meet expectations—" She did not finish the sentence. She didn't need to. River shifted subtly, pressing her flank against the wall, but not retreating. Sarah finally extended a hand slowly, allowing River to close the remaining distance if she chose. After a long pause, River leaned forward enough for Sarah's fingers to brush lightly along her shoulder. The touch was brief, measured. River tensed, but did not snap. Sarah nodded faintly, as though confirming a hypothesis. "She's been handled with discipline, not kindness," she said. "That tree you found her at. It's not random." Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. He had suspected as much, but had hoped otherwise. "What do you mean?" Sarah met his eyes directly now. "Some places become unofficial drop points, where liability ends, where someone can claim they warned others." Her gaze drifted toward the window, beyond the pines. "It's easier to abandon something if you've convinced yourself it deserves it." Caleb absorbed her words in silence. He replayed the sign nailed to the oak, the deliberate phrasing. "Dog killer. Leave it." He had torn it down instinctively, but now he understood the calculation behind it. If someone found her, the message discouraged interference. If no one did, nature handled the rest. "You're saying she was part of a system," he said slowly. Sarah nodded. "A system that values performance over life." Her tone carried neither anger nor bitterness, only weary clarity. "And pregnancy makes her unpredictable in that system. Less controllable, less profitable." River shifted again, breathing heavier for a moment before settling. Caleb felt a quiet surge of protectiveness sharpen inside him, not born from impulse, but from recognition. Sarah continued her examination gently, checking River's eyes, gums, listening to her heartbeat with a compact stethoscope. "The pups are viable," she confirmed softly. "But stress like this can complicate delivery." She met Caleb's gaze again, reading something unspoken there. If whoever left her realizes she's gone, they may not appreciate the interruption. The statement was calm, factual, without dramatics. Caleb understood implications without needing elaboration. He had seen organizations protect themselves before, quietly, efficiently. He looked down at River, who now watched Sarah with wary tolerance rather than fear. Trust was still fragile, but it was growing. Outside, the mist began to thin as sunlight filtered faintly through the trees. Caleb stepped toward the window, scanning the tree line out of habit. The cabin had once been a refuge from noise. Now it felt like a threshold between something hidden and something revealed. "If this is bigger than a single farm," he said carefully, "it won't stay quiet forever." Sarah closed her kit, posture straightening. "Truth rarely does," she replied. "It surfaces in pieces, usually when someone refuses to look away." Her hazel eyes lingered on him briefly, assessing his resolve. She had seen men step back once complications appeared. She did not sense retreat in him. River shifted closer to Caleb now, not touching but within reach. The gesture was subtle, almost incidental, but deliberate. Sarah noticed and allowed herself a small nod. "She chose you," she said simply. Caleb did not respond immediately. He understood that choice came with weight. He had stopped for a chained dog in a storm. He had not anticipated uncovering something systematic. Yet as he looked at River, at the life she carried and the scars she bore, he realized this was no longer a roadside act of mercy. It was a line drawn quietly against something larger. He turned back toward Sarah, expression steady. "Then we don't let it disappear," he said. And in that moment, the rescue became something more than survival. The storm returned after midnight, wind striking the cabin walls hard enough to rattle the window panes. Caleb had been sitting near the hearth when River's breathing changed. It was subtle at first, a tightening beneath her ribs, a low, restless shift against the wool blanket. The air inside the cabin felt heavier, charged with more than weather. River's body curved inward protectively, but this time she did not retreat to the farthest corner. Instead, she stayed near the fire, eyes flicking toward Caleb not in warning, but in awareness. He rose slowly, movements deliberate and calm. The disciplined control that had defined him in combat now softened into something steadier, quieter. He knelt a few feet away, careful not to crowd her space. "It's all right," he murmured, voice low enough to blend with the wind outside. For the first time since he had cut the chain, she did not growl when he moved closer. River's muscles contracted again, stronger now. A low whine escaped her throat, raw but not frantic. Caleb recognized the shift from tension to labor. He had witnessed birth once before on a remote deployment when a village woman had gone into labor during evacuation. He remembered the helplessness he felt then, the understanding that sometimes presence was the only control available. He gathered clean towels and placed them within reach, keeping his movements slow so as not to startle her. River's amber eyes locked with his briefly, and in that gaze there was no accusation, no fear, only strain and instinct. The wind roared outside, and thunder rolled across the ridge, but inside the cabin the world narrowed to breath and heartbeat. When the first pup arrived, small and slick with life, River instinctively turned to tend to it. Caleb remained still, offering quiet support rather than interference. The firelight cast a warm glow across her dark coat, illuminating the contrast between strength and vulnerability in her frame. Her body trembled, not from cold now, but from effort. Caleb passed a towel gently within reach when she nudged it accidentally, careful not to touch the pup unless necessary. The second contraction came harder, and River let out a sharp, guttural sound that cut through him more deeply than the thunder. He stayed steady, grounding himself in controlled breathing, reminding himself that panic would serve no one. Outside, headlights cut briefly through the trees, faint and distant. Caleb's head lifted instinctively toward the window, muscles tightening with reflex. Through sheets of rain, he saw the blurred suggestion of a vehicle moving slowly along the ridge road. The engine's hum was nearly swallowed by the storm, but it was there. His mind flicked through possibilities. Ray and Victor following tire tracks, searching. He rose halfway, torn between vigilance and the life unfolding in front of him. River sensed his shift and let out a sharp bark, not defensive, but urgent. He looked back at her, at the tiny body pressed against her belly, at another contraction building. The choice crystallized. He moved back to her side. Whatever threat lingered outside would have to wait. The second pup emerged smaller than the first, fragile, but breathing. Caleb felt something shift inside him that no training had prepared him for. This was not a mission with extraction coordinates. This was not measured success. It was fragile existence demanding presence. River glanced toward him again, her body angled slightly but no longer rigid. She allowed his hand to steady the towel beneath her without snapping. Trust, not complete but sufficient, held in that small permission. The wind battered the cabin harder, rain slashing against the glass as if trying to force entry, yet the interior felt grounded in a different kind of force, quiet resilience. The third pup came as dawn threatened behind the clouds. River's strength wavered momentarily, exhaustion shadowing her movements, but she persisted. Caleb remained kneeling beside her, shoulders damp with sweat despite the chill. When the final pup cried weakly, River nudged it close, licking with deliberate care. 3 small bodies pressed against her warmth, fragile and alive. Caleb exhaled slowly, unaware until then how tightly he had been holding himself together. The headlights outside faded, swallowed by the storm. Whether turned away by weather or doubt, he could not know. The mountain kept its silence. As gray morning light filtered through the windows, Caleb rose and opened the cabin door briefly. Cool air rushed in, sharp and clean after the night's violence. The forest stood washed and glistening, branches dripping with the remnants of rain. Freedom lay beyond the threshold, unguarded and open. River lifted her head, watching the doorway. For a long moment she remained still. Then she looked down at the 3 pups nestled against her and shifted her body closer around them. She did not rise. She did not move toward the forest. She chose to stay. Caleb stood there, hand resting lightly against the doorframe, understanding settling quietly within him. Some decisions could not be explained through duty or logic. They were made in moments when leaving would be easier. River had every reason to flee into the trees at first light. Instead, she stayed beside what she had chosen to protect. Caleb closed the door gently and returned to the hearth. In the calm that followed the storm, he realized that staying, truly staying, had changed something in both of them. This story contains fictionalized elements for entertainment and educational purposes.
Sometimes God does not shout his miracles across the sky. Sometimes he lets them unfold in a quiet cabin on a storm-torn mountain, in the steady hands of a man who chose to stop, and in the trembling strength of a mother who chose to stay. River was not just rescued from a chain. Caleb was not just pulled into a fight he did not expect. That night was a reminder that when we refuse to walk past suffering, we step directly into purpose. In our daily lives, the smallest decision to care can become part of something far greater than we understand. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs hope. Comment Amen if you believe God still works through ordinary people. Subscribe for more stories of courage, faith, and redemption. May God bless you, protect your home, and guide every step you take.